Okay, a conversation. Can you open up to page 488 in your blue books in the Chumashim? I'm pretty sure I have the right Chumash. You never know at Adat Shalom. Yeah, chapter and verse. So picky. Exodus 15:1. Shirat Hayam. Welcome to Shabbat Shira. This Shabbat is one of those that has a special name to it, and it's because of, it's not unique, but it is unusual in that the name comes not from the time of the year, but from the content of the Parsha. And we call this Shirat Hayam because this is the song of the sea. You know it best because this is where Micha Mocha comes from, right? But actually, this fragment of the Torah, biblical archaeologists tell us, is the oldest part of the Torah. How do they know that? Magic, I don't know. One of the reasons that they'll say that, and again, biblical archaeology is not my strong point, is the unusual endings of the verbs and the declensions. If you look in here, you can see, let me give you an example. We're in verse 5, but hey in the Hebrew. Tehomot Yechasyumu. Tehomot means the deeps. Yechasyumu means covered them, so it's saying that God covered the Egyptian army with the depths of the sea. But Yumu is not something that a modern Hebrew speaker would recognize, right? It's very, very ancient Hebrew and sounds a little bit different. And there's a bunch of, I think the technical word for it is declensions here. I feel like I've already maxed out my grammar allotment for the day. What I'm asking you to look, though, is at verse 3. So this is chapter 15, verse 3. So just so you know, the translation here is not a literal word for one translation, but it's probably right. And it says, Adonai, in the Hebrew, Ish Milchama, which means God the warrior. And I think my question for you is, do we want a God like this? Now, I want to remind you of I'm going to ask for your responses in a second, but I just want people to chew on it for a second. Remember the context of this, right? The people recently having been slaves, having left Egypt, Pharaoh decides, not only can they not leave, but we're just going to get rid of them all, pursues them in iron chariots, which were the height of technology to wipe the people off the face of the earth. They get, right, the people cross through the Reed Sea, through the marshy ocean, but the chariots get mired in the muck, right? The whole point of the Sea of Reeds thing is that when the chariots go through, they're too heavy, and they get stuck. And so when the water comes back, they try to turn around, but they can't, right? And therefore the water covers them. The army is essentially eradicated in one fell swoop. And you can sort of picture the entirety of the people on the other side of the ocean going like, and then all of a sudden breaking out into cheering, which is essentially what happens. And this song is something that happens in ancient literature where it was probably just a bunch of people going like, yeah! Like somebody decided to write a poem about it. So that's what we have here. And then Miriam later on goes out, and she has a much shorter, in certain ways more powerful piece. But this is the song that Moses sang. And one of the first things he says is, Adonai Ish Milchama, the Holy One, right? The source of being is a warrior. And my question for you is, what are the positives and negatives of having a warrior as your deity? Thoughts? Hands? Brian? Reminder for folks to introduce themselves. Not everybody knows everyone.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Brian. So if you understand God as a predicate,
Oh, that's deep, man.
it's taught here at Adat Shalom.
Yeah, that's right.
Then certainly one facet I think you would want, one facet of moral calling or obligation would be to be able to fight in the circumstances when fighting is required. Mm-hmm. So it's not the only thing you want, but there are times when it's appropriate.
Thank you. Beautiful, concise, lovely. Other thoughts about this? Judy Gelman? And then Rabbi George afterwards.
I think we all want to live in a time where we don't want God to be a warrior, where we don't want to feel that we need God as a warrior. But it seems like every culture has a God that's a warrior. I mean, ancient cultures, there's Ares and all these gods. And it's a really horrible thought to think that you need a deity to be the head of your army. And we've lived, Jews in America have lived in a time where we don't think of needing God as a warrior. But if we think of Jews in Europe, as long ago, as recent as 80 years ago, they did want God. They wanted their God to be a warrior for them. And to me, it's just a very sad thought to think that you need your God to have military might.
Okay. I think when you say we all, I'm not sure we all, but I think the point was well articulated.
Me all.
Me all. Rabbi? Yeah.
Whoop. We need God as a warrior right now.
Okay.
We need God as a warrior right now. We need that attribute of divinity, great strength, and we need that attribute of the ability to take on our enemies, because we have enemies who threaten us and all peace-loving people in our midst. And that part of us, if it's part of us, and the need for that kind of strength seems to me is upon us. And that's why we're having a meeting tomorrow, right? And we will again.
I'm a little worried that people think we're organizing a militia, which we are not, but I do appreciate your point, Rabbi. Let me ask a follow-up question, which is this. It says here, Adonai ish milchama, Adonai shmo, God is a warrior. That one's name is Adonai, or that one's name is Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. Markevot paro v'chelo yarav hayam, and the chariots of Pharaoh sank down into the depths. I think my question is, just in terms of what you know about the story, and actually even just reading Shirat Hayam, if you want to look at, what I would do is turn to the page before, but literally, physically, practically, how is God a warrior here? What is the song talking about? What were the actions that were taken in which they're like, Adonai ish milchama? So this is more of a factual question, but I'd love someone just to sort of answer. When the song is sort of cheering and says God is a warrior, what exactly did God do? Yeah. Right.
Basically, it sounds like Stu Simon.
Hi, Stu.
Stand up, okay. Not a warrior. That he was using, he was basically a god of nature. That first the waters were not there, the Jews could cross the area, and then once they crossed, then when the army tried to follow, the waters came back, and it was nature that basically, God as nature did its job and saved the Jewish people.
God as nature did his job and saved the Jewish people. You are onto something, Stu. There's something interesting here. Other comments about this? What's the what? Yeah, Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate, and actually what struck me is if God is all-powerful, then we don't need to label him
Or her,
God
or him.
a warrior. And to your point from last night, I don't know that I know what we need right now. Maybe what I need is a God of peace. And maybe the God that rescued the Jews was not a warrior, but a God of peace. So I just feel like, especially if God is all-powerful, then I think it's funny to call God a warrior at one time or another.
Yeah,
And I don't know,
you're onto something here, but I want to get into the stuff. What happens such that God becomes called a warrior? Noah's over here raising her hand.
I'm kind of depressed about this. I'm sorry. It's a God of vengeance, and I feel like our people, definitely in Israel and definitely what's happening now, have chosen that.
Noah, you know how much I love you, but I'm going to strongly disagree with you in this case.
I think it's a God. It's a God of
When you say
retribution.
where is the retribution?
by
in this-
what he did, by what
What-
he, ימינך אדוני תרעץ אויב,
No,
תהרוס
what is-
קמך. So
No, but what
your
did he-
anger will
But what did he
finish
do?
them.
But because retribution means, right, like going after people after the fact for what they have done wrong. I'm asking someone to just home in, zoom in on what actually happens in this story, so that we can talk about whether this is whether we can use the title retribution.
He's, the anger of God is eliminating the enemies. That's what I'm hearing here.
I think you're okay. I want to, Melissa. Do you want to say something? Now that I've said it, you have right. Yeah.
I'm Melissa, and I'm just going to read from the Etz Chaim version, footnote 4, which says,
Footnote 4.
as the Egyptians drowned Israelite babies, so they themselves were drowned. As they immersed the Israelites in mud-like mortar, so they now sank in the mud. In short, all of us eventually pay for what we have done wrong.
Okay, so karma and measure for measure is a really big part of the Torah, by the way. Almost all of the books of Genesis and large parts of the book of Exodus, actually all 5 books, have a kind of like, what you get is what you did. Well, the Noah, what happens here? Who makes the decision to go into the sea to eradicate these people? I'm sorry, this feels kind of obvious to me. Yes, Steve? Last comment.
Hi, I'm Steve. Okay. I view it a little bit the opposite of negative. I view it that it follows, you can't take it out of context. He's just said, the Lord is my God, I exalt him, he's my father, my parent, whatever, and said, he's going to battle for me. I view warrior as a follow-up to the other comments. So I think it was taken a little bit out of context. And I'm saying that, you know what, this is the declaration that I love God, he's going to be there for us. So I view it as a positive comment.
Okay. I'm still going to keep on pushing us to center in to the what of what's happening here. Because the what is simply this, which is that a strong east wind blows the water off of the seafloor, and so there's kind of a mucky, marshy, it's called dry land, but it's not very much, a mucky, marshy thing. And that muck is strong, is basically like, I'm not sure what the right word for it. Somebody in here is a geologist, and you're going to lecture me afterwards. Please, bring it on. That muck is enough for barefoot, downtrodden people to make their way across the sea, but too sticky for an army to walk through. Pharaoh leads the army right into the trap, and the only thing that the Holy One does after that is just lets the waters return. I would like to point out, nobody forced Pharaoh to take the army into the sea. Nobody. Talk about retribution, that's retribution. The slaves are gone, and in retribution for what happened in Egypt, right, Pharaoh's like, I am going to eradicate these people. Listen, many of you are lawyers, right? That was sarcastic. Don't you glory in the counterfactuals? It would have been incredibly possible for an omniscient, all-powerful God basically just to zap everybody with lightning, but it doesn't happen that way. And one of the things I want to point out about this story, which I find both uplifting and a little bit confusing, is when it says that Hashem is a warrior, she, he, it is a warrior. What's interesting is it's not a particular retributive moment, because all that the Holy One does is make it possible for slaves to go free and offer the opportunity for an army to keep going or stop if it wants to. It's only when they've gotten themselves in too deep that the waves come back. David. A number of. So great. I have to tell you something. I can't see over there very easily. If you want to ask, will you come over here? Okay. Okay. David.
I'm to your right. No. I'm David. I agree with your whole analysis, but I'm tripping on Pharaoh is thinking about changing his mind, and God stiffens his heart and says to Moses, and this is on verse. It's on verse 17. let the Israelites march into the sea on dry ground, and I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. So there, like the other plagues, there's a little bit of Pharaoh and their people doing the wrong thing, and then there's a little bit of God's sort of making sure that they don't
Yeah, this is a
back out.
trap, just to be clear. Like, the Holy One knows what Pharaoh and the army are going to do. This is definitely a trap. It's a manipulation. It's a way of doing it. There's like a nudge given on something like, but it doesn't seem like too much of a nudge, as a matter of fact. Yeah, Steve.
Steve Brody, Shabbat Shalom. Not at all being comfortable, except at the very primal level with God, per se, but more buying into godliness and predicate theology. That's how I always look at all this text. And for me, this is the most primal need of humanity since we've had any consciousness, surviving. You got to deal with the saber-toothed tigers, you got to deal with whatever goes on in your life. And if you get from the threat and the risk to survival, it's almost like the miracle of evolution, the survival of the fittest, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, that's what this is this is embracing the fact, look at what we, quote unquote, should have experienced, and we've gotten through it, and we're safe, and we've survived.
Thanks, Steve. It matters how you fight. I'm going to close it down, Bruce. It matters how you fight. It matters what you do when you're fighting. It matters the way that you fight. It matters the rules of conflict that you choose for yourself. It matters how you fight. It's very interesting to me that sometimes I feel like the spiritual vocabulary of the moment that we've gotten into has been collapsed in such a way as I find to be unhelpful and usable, in which basically what we talk about when we talk about what human beings should be is in sort of one word adjectives or descriptions: empathy, strength, force, softness. The paucity of those descriptions does not allow for the kind of breath that a human being needs in order to navigate the world as it is, which is, we all know, a very, very, very complicated place. For indeed, one of the things that, even though Shirat Hayam is a song that's glorifying this particular battle, the way in which the battle was fought, I think, is more subtle and more thoughtful than any of us would ever give it credit for. It is not a point in time in which a largely armed force of Jewish people attacks, right, someone who is vulnerable or painful or in a difficult place, but rather that people who are downtrodden on some level find themselves in a place where, because of wisdom and insight and thoughtfulness, a much larger, much more powerful force is defeated. I'm not a military person. I don't want to arrogate myself to the kind of ideas or something like that speak about what it means to fight war, because I just don't know how to do it. But it is very striking to me that at this, which in certain ways is the heart of the Torah, when you think about what happens at the Sea of Reeds, there is a non-obviousness to the way that Pharaoh and his army are defeated that I think we should pay attention to, because it matters how we fight. One of the hardest things in the world is when people give themselves an excuse to do the worst thing that they can possibly think of. And indeed, before the worst things that you can think of happen, there is almost always a kind of rhetorical trumpeting that explains why this awful step that I'm about to take is both necessary and deserved. I don't think I need to say more than that in this particular moment. And yet, it doesn't just matter that we are on the right side of things, but also I think that we find a way to fight for ourselves that comports with our humanity. If you were here last night, you know about my uncertainty in this moment. I don't need to say more than that at the moment. And I wish I could sort of stand up here and say, here is step A, B, and C about what it is that we do next. But as the Holy One creates a situation here in which ultimately it's the action of pharaohs and the army that determine their own future and their own fate, I ask us not only to exercise passion, but to exercise wisdom as we fight for ourselves, for our families, and what we believe in this moment. Shabbat Shalom.